And now, to get started without further ado, as we get started the seminar of economics of Ceylon tea, the very first area to be covered is the current domestic and global economic issues and their impact on the business of tea exports. And to deliver the keynote on this subject, I would like to invite Mr. Dhananath Fernando, Chief Executive Officer of Advocata Institute. To introduce him officially, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Dhananath is the Chief Executive Officer of Advocata Institute, and he is also a founding member of the Institute and had worked as Advocata's Chief Operating Officer since its inception. Prior to founding Advocata, Dhananath worked as an Associate Research Director at Breakthrough Business Intelligence, a leading market research agency in Sri Lanka. He read for his bachelor's degree in biosciences and biochemistry at the University of Colombo and is an alumnus of the International Visitor Leadership Program by the State Department of the United States of America, and as well as an alumnus of the Atlas Think Tank Leadership Academy in Washington, D.C. He is the host of Public Space Sri Lanka, a one-on-one weekly TV discussion with politicians on RTV, and a morning news program, Wake Up with Art. Dhananath is also a curator and founding member of AK Lit Fest, a trilingual literature festival dedicated to showcasing local authors to Sri Lanka. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together as I invite Mr. Dhananath Fernando.
Thank you very much for that generous introduction, and I'm deeply honored for the invitation. And when actually Mr. Ganeshan invited me, I was hesitant to accept the invitation because I do not know anything pretty much about tea except for enjoy a good cup of tea. So I in fact tried to connect someone else, but Mr. Ganeshan said, no, we want to know about the economic context, so I'm welcomed. But I thought even after accepting the invitation, 3 o'clock, these economic issues, exchange rate, debt restructuring, those are not the popular topics during these days. So it would be slightly, I don't want to leave people on a Friday evening with a sort of a bad tone or bad mood. So when I was surfing the internet, I found a story. So I thought this story would bring a summary of my entire remarks, which quite helped me to conceptualize what I want to speak about. So, have you heard about a reality TV program called America Got Talent, which is somewhat similar to the Voice program which is being telecasted now? So in this America Got Talent reality show, there was a lady who walked for a performance few months ago. Her name was Lily Moyola. So in the judge panel, there was this tough judge called Simon, who asked always tough questions. And Lily came on stage with an outfit where the butterflies were hatched. And Simon asked Lily, there are so many people come on stage. What is unique about your performance? And Lily answered, she said, I'm going to sing a song, which is an original song. I'm the lyricist. I did the melody. And this song was written at a time when everything was perfect in my life. And the name of the song is The Daydream. But over a period of time, the meaning of this song changed. So then the Simon questions back, what do you mean it changed? She said, by the time when I wrote this song, everything was perfect, everything was magical, it was a butterfly moment. I had a record deal signed for an album, but that was the time I wrote the song, but things flipped upside down because my mother was diagnosed with cancer, then I had to be the full-time caretaker of my mother. So then I lost the record deal, but at least I'm happy that I spent a lot of time with my mother. At least I could sacrifice some time to her. When I thought about this story, I thought it's the story of Sri Lanka. Because we all had that butterfly moment. Everything was perfect. We were the strategically located everything we wanted to have is here. Beautiful weather, everything was perfect, and we always had the hope. When the war was ended, we had the hope. When the economy was opened in 1977, we had the hope. And when after the war, we had the hope. After tsunami, we had the hope. So everything, it was the hope which kept us going. Like for Lily Moela, everything was perfect, but sometimes it flipped upside down. But then she sang this song where the lyrics really hit us to really think where we really need to move forward. So I got a small clip, just a 1 minute of her actual singing, just to really connect you back with my key message. Then I'll come to the exchange rate and debt restructuring. But I think this is going to be my message. I hope everyone can leave with a positive note. Shall we play that small clip?
When we were kids in the backyard, playing astronauts and rock stars, no one told us to stop it, called us unrealistic. And suddenly you're 18, go to college for your plan B. What you want is too risky, live for weekends and whiskey. We all got these big ideas, one day they're replaced with fears. How did we get here? Darling, don't quit your daydream. It's your life that you're making. It ain't big enough if it doesn't scare the hell out of you. If it makes you nervous, it's probably worth it. Why save it for sleep when you could be living your daydream?
So as Lily says, we all had these big ideas, but they all have been replaced with fears. And I think we are already in that moment. And the beauty is, after she sang this song, she got a golden buzzer. That means she's going straight to the live program after the audition. So I think our context is, things are quite not looking good, but we live in the daydream, and we always looking for a positive break. And what I can expect is, if we do the reforms that we all need to be done, I think we can live in the daydream that we all wanted to live, that prosperous, very competitive Sri Lanka. But it also will be scary. As she says in her verse, if it ain't big enough, if it doesn't scare the hell out of you, it will be very scary to reach there, but when you reach there, it will be the daydream Sri Lanka that we all want to live. Now in that daydream, I know the components. Now which is scaring you? First is the exchange rate. Let me start with that, which is now the rupee is appreciating, which is not favorable for most of the exporters. So rather than doing a prediction, I would like to give you a framework how to think about it, so it's easier to overcome and do the planning. Interest rate is mainly the price that we pay for money. I'm sure we all are aware of it. When we go to the bank, there's a CEO of a bank, when we go to his bank and ask for money, the price that he sells the money is the interest rate. So in the Sri Lankan context, as we all know, business runs on credit. That means we go to the bank and we ask for money, we pay an interest rate, and with that money, we go it and buy dollars. The challenge is, when the interest rates are increasing, that means the price of the money is increasing. That means we really can't go to the bank and ask money. Of course, we can ask money, but we have to pay a higher price. And when we have to pay a higher price for the rupees, of course, we can't really go and buy the dollars as we used to do it. So as a result, when the interest rates are high, the demand for dollars are diminishing. Of course, people always say it's import controls. That also is one reason. But more than the import controls, in my view, it's the high interest rates. Because if you remember, about a year back, the interest rates were low, but there were import controls. But still, the rupee depreciated. It went from 200 to almost for 400. So when the interest rates are high, it automatically contracts the demand for dollars. And now we are in a situation, we really can't go with rupees and buy dollars, so the demand for dollars has decreasing, but the supply of dollars is somewhat increasing comparatively to where we were, because tourism is working, remittances are working, so there's dollars coming into the market, but the demand is low, so as a result, the price of the dollar is coming down. So the prediction is as you can predict. The reason for the higher interest rates is now what we have to understand. As we all know, we kept the interest rate artificially low. And when you keep the interest rate artificially low, the opposite of what I explained happened. That means people are going to buy more money because the interest rates are low. And when they are buying more and more money, that means we are pushing more and more imports. When you are pushing more and more imports, if you don't have the supply of dollars, of course the price of the dollar increases. And when you don't have dollars, it's where we defaulted on our debt, because we really didn't have dollars to pay our creditors, of course for even imports. We kept it artificially at 200 level, but it cannot sustain. So as a result, the inflation also went up. And when the inflation is up, the only thing that you could do is to manage it, to increase the interest rate, to cut down that demand of people consuming more and more. That contracts the economy, and that's where we are today. And now the prediction is, as you can see, the inflation is coming down as a result of the economy is contracting. So when the inflation is coming down, hopefully, it is expected to come to single-digit levels, according to the Governor of the Central Bank, by end of this year or early next year, first quarter of next year. So with that, the interest rate should come down. When the interest rates are coming down, my view is the dollar, the rupee will start again, will have a slight depreciation, because the demand for imports will again increase. At the same time, according to the IMF agreement, we really cannot keep the imports restricted for a longer period of time. So as a result, the import restrictions has to be relaxed. And even yesterday, as you may have seen, there was a requirement for banks to deposit a cash advance for some of the imports of these 870 odd HS codes, so which has now been removed. But it won't come drastically down, because still the interest rates are high. So as a result, still the dollar is expected to slightly appreciate. At the same time, the central bank is buying dollars. So in the dollar market, there are few players who buy the dollars, mainly the importers as well as the central bank. Now, since the interest rates are high, importers are not buying the dollars, but the central bank is somewhat buying to build the reserves. The opposite can also happen. If the central bank sells dollars to the market, again, the dollar can be appreciated, or the rupee can be appreciated. But now central bank is not doing that. They are trying to buy dollars to build up the reserves. So that's the prediction. So basically, the framework is, when the interest rates are high, most likely the demand for imports will be low. And if you have the constant inflow of dollars, of course, the rupee is going to appreciate. And that's what you are experiencing at the moment. And that's what, there's the confusion in the market, what's happening. And with that, I will also come to the next point, is on the domestic debt restructuring. So with this context, as we all know, with the IMF agreement, we are at the edge on the domestic debt restructuring. Now we need to understand, in my view, domestic debt has already been restructured, because there are 4 ways that the domestic debt can be restructured. First is through inflation. Simply, most of you, as Mr. Ganesh mentioned in his welcome remarks, the cost of living is high. That means inflation is high. So all of your assets and your savings and your EPF, ETF money, the amount of goods and services you could purchase from the same amount of money is probably now has been halved. Pretty much inflation has restructured the domestic debt instruments. Because of it's there as a value, but it's already restructured. The second way that you can restructure the domestic debt is through taxation. As we all know, with taxation, it has been somewhat restructured because government is now getting more money which is coming to our hand. The third one, you can restructure the debt is by keeping the interest rate artificially low. But that cannot be done now because interest rates are high. Because if you keep the interest rates low, that means again the economies start consuming more and we will have a dollar shortage. The fourth one is the restructuring tool that we all talk about. That is either a haircut, which is the common term these days, or a coupon clipping, or a maturity extension, or a combination of all those four. So unfortunately, I cannot comment anything there because we are all waiting for the central bank guideline on the domestic debt restructuring structure. So there is no point jumping the gun. My expectation is, it's most likely from what I hear on news, what I read on media, most likely it would be a maturity extension. But here are some of the statistics analyzed by, with all due credit to Verite Research. Dr. Shantan Devarajan, who is also an advisor to the Sri Lankan government on the IMF program, who is also an author of the research report that I'm going to quote, which was published about a year ago, but they have done a comprehensive domestic debt restructuring scenario. So according to them, it is very unlikely to do a coupon clipping for the banks, bonds. The reason is, from the bank's interest income, 36%, about 36% is from the interest which is coming from the investments on the treasury bills and treasury bonds for the banks. So if you give a coupon clipping there will be an impact on the banking sector on their income. So they do not expect a coupon clipping for the bank. So as we all expect, it most would likely be a maturity extension. However, the central bank has already said that they are willing to restructure the treasury bills holding by the central bank, which has been pronounced by the governor himself. So we are waiting to see whether the restructuring is going to happen at the bank's front with the treasury bonds that they are holding, or on the EPF, ETF, which most of their funds have been invested in these treasury bills and treasury bonds. So most likely, in my view, it would be a maturity extension, which will not have a bigger impact on the banking sector, nor on the pension funds. But according to, from evaluating the statements from the president, there might be a consolidation in the banking or the non-banking financial sector to sustain the sector is what I expect. Not yet pronounced, again, completely seeing from the media reports, but that's the way that you have to see it. 36% of the income of the banks are from these treasury bills and treasury bonds. So that's the context of the domestic debt restructuring. At the same time, we have to keep in mind, for the banks, they are already going through a restructuring with the international sovereign bonds, because they are also holding the international sovereign bonds, which we don't know, again, the restructuring formula. Most likely there will be a haircut. That means they have to cut down the principal amount. So anyway, they are going through a restructuring. So that's where the concern comes, that they will not be able to absorb another domestic debt restructuring. That's on the domestic debt restructuring front. On the exchange front, exchange rate front, we covered. And third and finally, on the global economy. I think more than, I know the key export markets, the Iran, Turkey, Russia, while we are evaluating those markets, but I think the short-term incidents that we are quite concerned is the situation in US. Because like we are going through a debt crisis, US is also going through a debt crisis because they are trying to increase their debt ceiling. Because the US system is such that the Congress has to approve the debt ceiling, which need the support of the Republicans as well, which is for the Democratic governing party who is in power. So the Republicans are quite resistant to increase that debt ceiling. They are asking certain demands to cut down some of the spending if they were to increase the debt ceiling. So we are about 2 weeks behind to see what's going to happen. If they don't increase the debt ceiling, there are predictions that the US itself will default on their debt. If that happens, there is no point focusing on Russia and Iran because the entire global financial architecture is going to be shaken. So we are waiting to see on 2 weeks, according to Janet Yellen. They are hopeful that something will happen, as you may have seen on international newspapers. The US president has to cut down his visit to Australia, which was for a Quad meeting. So he only flew to Japan and quickly came back to US because there are so many domestic issues that he has to solve. So we have to wait for 2 weeks to see, probably on a perimeter on the local debt restructuring on one front, and also on the international front, whether what's going to happen in the US front, whether they can increase the debt ceiling and service their debt and make sure that the international financial stability is assured. On the other hand, on the international front, there is also tensions between China and Taiwan. So that is also somewhat coming in. Recently, China has made a statement that their sovereign integrity and territorial integrity will be protected. But I think what the US is trying to do is making a war very expensive for Taiwan, so they have supporting quite a lot in terms of providing ammunition for Taiwan, so it would be very expensive to have a battle in that region. But because if it happens again, it will affect the entire region and the global financial architecture. So that's the global overview, rather than, I think, of course, there's Ukraine and the Russian war, which affects the exports. But rather than that, I think the two nearby events that we have to focus is these two events. The bigger question is, when we wake up next day morning as citizens, as business community, what we can do. That's the bigger question. Because we all know, of course, we can't increase the debt ceiling for US, and we can't announce a debt restructuring method on behalf of the central bank. We all have to wait. But as citizens, what is within our control? That's the biggest question. So in my view, as I have always been very outspoken on this, we have to focus on reforms. That's the only way out. And as Lily Moeller said, when you do the reforms, it would be leaving our comfortable zone. It is reaching that competitive arena. But if you really want to live in that daydream, we have to come out from that comfortable zone and being competitive if we really want to get that golden buzzer. So in terms of those 5 reforms, mainly what we have been advocated was mainly for a social safety net, which has somewhat implemented, because if the poor sections, the people who really having a hardship, who really can't increase their income with the inflation, has to be protected. So that's why we recommend a social safety net. Now they have selected, the targeting has been somewhat done, but I think it's not a perfect targeting, but it may be a good start. But we have to move forward with that. That's number one, because if poor people start coming to road and start protesting, and if they are having a hard time, it's very difficult to operate any business. So we have to make sure that things are under control at the ground level, because they are really having a hard time. With 40% inflation rate, which is coming down from 100%, it's very difficult. And we also need to understand, inflation coming down doesn't mean the prices are going down. Inflation is simply the rate that the prices are increasing. So just because the inflation is coming down, the prices on some of the commodities may come down, but it doesn't mean the cost of living as the total is going to drop drastically. It's basically the rate that the prices are increasing is going to slow down. So the poor people are already having a difficult time. So that's the main reform, first reform that we recommended. The second one, as we all know, the state-owned enterprises reform. Some has to be privatized. There's a committee has been formed. We are yet to see the results. I think yesterday they have approved, the cabinet has approved the state-owned enterprises policy, which was drafted. So we are waiting to see some of the transactions to take place probably on the second and the third quarter of this year. That unfortunately or fortunately, I know there are different views by people, but I think in my view, those reforms has to take place. Third is, we really cannot just stagnant in growth. We have to grow ourselves out of the crisis. The economic growth, keeping at 2%, 3%, we really can't sustain. We really need to increase our growth. Because 2%, 3% growth is, even if you don't do anything, you will have a 2%, 3% growth because it's organic growth. But we really need to move to 5%, 6% to grow out from this crisis. That can only happen with people like you who are trading, globally trading, connecting to global supply chains, trade with each other. That's the only way we can come out. The fourth is the deregulation process. There are so much of unnecessary regulations which is hindering the business activities, starting from visa for tourists to registering a business. So many regulation which stops business being operating at its full potential. I think those deregulation has to take place. Finally, none of these are possible without the governance structures. Because all this, we cannot find a technical solution for a governance issue. The economic governance has to come in place. That is building the institutions and having those proper institution framework to make sure this is sustainable. Otherwise, we will easily fall back to where we were few months ago. So on that front, we have to build the institutions. The procurement commission has to be activated, and those independent commissions has to be brought into, again, activate, and democracy has to be established. Those governance structures has to happen. Without that, we really will not be able to move forward. So I will wrap up with that. I will take up the other questions in the Q&A. But what I would like to wrap up again by quoting what Lily Moela's song. I'm sure we all are breaking for the weekend. Definitely not for whiskey because it has become very expensive when it's not available. But to reaching to that uncomfortable zone, and it will really scare us. But only if we scare and if we leave our comfortable zone is the only way that we can live in our daydream, that the Sri Lanka that we all dreamt for many years. Thank you very much.